What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. All right, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We now have, as of right now, Invest 93L currently hovering off the coast of Florida. It is expected to move through Florida, enter the Gulf, and then potentially organize and strengthen even further, although we have seen some possible indications that this could actually develop off the coast of Florida before it even makes landfall. We'll get more into that in just a second. We also have a few other things to talk about, but our main show will be 93L because it poses a pretty big threat to Florida and the rest of the Gulf Coast, from the Gulf of Azoria and Texas all the way to the Florida Panhandle. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So this is the latest from the National Hurricane Center. They have tagged this, and they have given this a 30% chance of formation in the next 7 days. Given the fact that this system's already organizing at a pretty quick pace, in my opinion, this is pretty conservative at this current point, but I can understand at the same time the NHC is being a little cautious with this. They're probably going, okay, we're seeing these developments, but we'll hold off on increasing the chances dramatically, and we'll wait and see how this will pan out. So here's what we have right here. An area of low pressure located just offshore of the east coast of Florida is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms. This disturbance is forecast to move westward across Florida during the next day or so, and in the northeastern Gulf by late Tuesday. Environmental conditions appear favorable for some gradual development of the system, and it is possible, while it moves westward to northwestward across the northeastern and north central portions of the Gulf during the later to middle part of this week. Regardless of development, heavy rainfall could produce localized flash flooding over portions of Florida and the north central Gulf Coast throughout the middle to later portion of this week. 20% chance in that formation in the next 48 hours, 30% in the next 7 days, so we're going to want to keep a close eye on it. But one thing I do want to kind of emphasize based on this latest advisory update is they before kept it pretty much on the west coast of Florida and predominantly in the Gulf only for this development. Given the organization that the system is already going through right now, 93L off the coast, they've expanded this further to the east to allow for that possibility of development closer to Florida than not. So we're going to want to also keep that in mind as well. And I know earlier today, you saw the thumbnail, I kind of pulled a little bit of a Weatherman Plus with with the hurricane possible tag on it, but I did it for a very specific reason. And this is why. As you can see right here, this is Fox 35's scenarios for this week. There's the low pressure system over here off the coast of Florida. You have three possibilities right here. You have the green possibility, which is probably no tropical development. The system moves north of Daytona Beach and then makes landfall in southern Mississippi and doesn't really have enough time to develop. Then you have the yellow, where the system makes landfall around Cape Canaveral, right here, and then it kind of heads towards Louisiana, maybe a tropical depression or storm at this current point. And then you have this red scenario from Fox 35 where the system moves further to the south near Melbourne, closer to Port St. Lucie over here in Florida, and then makes landfall over there in parts of Louisiana or Texas right here. Stronger storm, tropical storm, or hurricane possible. Given the latest updates and given the latest data that we have taken a look at, as well as other meteorologists that we will show you in a second, I believe, in my opinion, that yellow and red is by far the most likely at this current point. Green is probably off the table at this point, in my opinion, given how quickly things have organized. Yellow and red, it's a bit, I'd say it's about 50-50 between those two scenarios right there, and it just all depends on what happens in Florida. And kind of this another thing that we're paying attention to as well is a possible relocation of the center moving forward of the low-level circulation. In fact, we've been kind of highlighting this. I know Eric Webb, Andy Hazelton, and Andrew Austin Adler have talked about this on Twitter, and we'll go ahead and pull them up very quickly. So let's go ahead and start with Eric Webb's tweet, as well as him showing the satellite imagery from this system right here that's currently organizing. Still keeping a close eye on this elongated trough off the coast of Florida, because this is still a trough right here. It's still attached to a trough right here. It hasn't completely detached yet. It's not going to do that for a little bit at this current point, but you're still going to want to pay attention to that going forward. This system is organizing at a decent pace, arguably more so than just about all the model forecasts up to this point. I wouldn't be shocked if this becomes a tropical depression before it reaches Florida. This is Eric Webb right here. You're already starting to see a low-level circulation really starting to turn up as it moves further and further closer towards Florida, and it looks like there's a bit of a southward shift to that. Andy Hazelton also noticed that as well. And he posted this reply for you, ladies and gentlemen. Also watching for a down shear reformation to the south under the convection would raise the ceiling if it crosses the peninsula further south. And Andrew Austin Adler also pointed out something similar as well. With an upper level low imparting northeasterly shear around 10 to 15 knots, we'll need to watch out for the possibility of center relocations down shear. This would tug the vortex further south, potentially increasing time over water both pre-landfall in Florida and in the Gulf. It's these mesoscale features that global models have a hard time resolving. So take those solutions with a grain of salt. So basically, what we have right here is essentially with Adler's tweet, with Eric Webb's tweet, and with Andy Hazelton's response right here is essentially, okay, the system's organizing at a pretty quick rate. There's some things that are still unresolved with the models, and there's an indication that we have a relocation possibility further to the south that would put more of Florida and more of the Gulf Coast in the line of fire, given the amount of power that this could generate. So let's go ahead and shift back now over here towards satellite imagery. And as we can go ahead and zoom in on this real quickly, taking a quick gander at this, going to the northwestern Atlantic. Unfortunately, they don't have a thing for Invest 93L at this current point. It's going to take a few hours for Tropical Tidbits to plug that in. But as you can see right here, convection has been pretty consistent. It's not been this typical popcorning convection like you would notice where one section falls and then rises and falls, and then another section rises and falls. It's been sustaining itself pretty decently off the coast of Florida. Matter of fact, it's been doing that for the last little while. This is 15 hours back right here when we started noticing this convection started bubbling up right here. It's been doing that overnight, and it's been doing that in the morning. Even during diurnal minimum, it's still maintaining its convection, and it's starting to show a low-level circulation. Unfortunately, some radar that we would normally show as well to kind of get an indicator of how the system is developing below those clouds. The Melbourne radar is down because it got struck by lightning, unfortunately, so we can't really show that to you today. Otherwise, I would have absolutely pulled that up, and it would have been no problem. But unfortunately, today's not the day for that. We'll have to wait and see how the NWS over there fixes that. But ultimately, you have this convection sustaining itself pretty decently, and not just, it's also kind of, you're noticing more convection starting to fire off in the Florida peninsula as well, that you're going to want to pay attention to going forward. But the reason I'm showing this and the reason I'm talking about this is, by and large, this satellite imagery is indicating to me that, yes, it's organizing pretty quickly. We already have an upper level circulation, low that's kind of starting to kind of keep it in place, and you have a low level circulation that's starting to rotate and it's starting to tighten up quite a bit. So those who are thinking that development is possible before it reaches Florida, I'm in the same boat as you, given the satellite imagery, given the conditions that we have on the ground, and given a few other factors as well. First of all, we weren't even anticipating that this was going to really start getting its act together until it crossed over Florida and turned into the Gulf. The only model that actually had that going was, ironically enough, the Icon, the one where I was saying, oh, this is a little aggressive right here, guys. This is a little crazy right here. The Icon was definitely on something, at least in terms of its initialization with this. Now, granted, do I still believe in its intensity? That's a topic we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. But by and large, it's getting its act together, and things are starting to turn up. So now we can go ahead and start to take a look at some of the conditions that it's currently running into now, and it's going to be running into in the Gulf. Let's go ahead and start with the global sea surface temperatures. And starting off right here, taking a quick look at this, this is interesting right here. We've really seen a pretty big surge of water temperatures in the Gulf over the last couple of weeks. Heck, even the last few days, we've seen a pretty big spread out of the water temperatures of 30+ degrees Celsius waters pretty much across the Gulf. And where this currently is at right now, where it's currently kind of thunderstorming over, it's in an area of around 29 to 30 degrees Celsius. Yes, we're starting to notice 30-degree contours of water temperatures starting to hover around in the Gulf Stream right here, right over where the system is at right now, where it's currently heading into those waters. It's going to continue to organize using that warm water, and we're going to want to pay attention to that. But once it moves through Florida, it's the coldest water that it runs into is 30 degrees Celsius. If it even moves further to the north into Louisiana, it's moving into even warmer waters. Now, granted, it's going to have less time over those waters, but the point still stands. This is a 30 plus degrees Celsius water temperature gradient right here, and it's going to not get any cooler than that. Heck, even to Galveston, you're close to 30 degrees Celsius, which for those of you living in the United States, that's 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are almost bathtub waters. Heck, Louisiana, what you're noticing, 32 degrees Celsius, that's 90 degrees Fahrenheit just off the coast right there. Someone in the comments was asking me about that, taking a quick look at the charts right there. Yeah, we're starting to see those returns coming in here on the maps too. We're starting to see close to 90 degree Fahrenheit waters off the coast of Louisiana. That is pretty scary for me as a forecaster looking at that. Not just for, for hurricanes, but also environmental reasons as well along those areas. So that is a very big concern. And if anything is going to generate, it's going to be because of these very warm waters. These waters aren't just warm, they're also down deep a little bit. So this system, if it stays out of the potential wind shear it's going to be in, is going to potentially have a lot more power to it than what we were potentially thinking. Because right now, kind of the models are all over up in the air right there. But right now, some people in Storms United are thinking, okay, maybe it's going to be like a strong to moderate tropical storm at most. If it develops further to the south and it stays away from that wind shear and it mixes out that dry air, which it easily can do, and we talked about it yesterday and we'll talk about it again, there could be some more power to that, and I wouldn't necessarily put a hurricane off the table because of that. And neither does Fox 35 like we showed with that graphic earlier. That's what the water temperatures are showing. Ocean heat content, man oh man. Not as explosive as it is in the loop current, but if it does move further to the south, and taking a quick look at this graphic right here, there could be a possibility where if this system relocates further to the south, it could clip the loop current, at least in terms of its ocean heat content. That is something you do not want to see, especially if it does that, because it's going to be away from the wind shear further up to the north, and that could potentially allow for the system to really start to turn up in its intensification while it's over the loop current. And because it's going to be moving at least not very fast, it's going to have time to really turn up and really organize and intensify if it gets that far south. That is a scenario we do not want to see, especially this early in hurricane season. Kind of reminds me of Hurricane Hannah back in 2020, where the system organized and developed and strengthened. It got up to a 90-mile-per-hour Category 1 hurricane before making landfall in South Texas. And the reason it was able to do that was essentially it was kind of disorganized, elongated, but then it ran into some pretty considerable ocean heat content and really blew up with its convection in about a day before landfall, and it allowed for it to rapidly intensify and rapidly strengthen up to a 90-mile-per-hour system before making landfall in late July, if my memory holds me correctly. So that could be another situation right there. There's kind of two analogs that I'm noticing with the water temperatures, the OHC, and kind of the conditions in the environment around it. That is of Hurricane Barry back in 2019. That's been thrown around quite a lot in Storms United. And Hurricane Hannah, which is something that hasn't been thrown around a lot, at least more of a northward scenario of Hurricane Hannah, I would say, is possible with these analogs. And that's because if this relocates further to the south, plenty of OHC to tap into, ladies and gentlemen, and it's going to be staying away from some rather interesting amounts of wind shear that could potentially chip it away. So that's your ocean heat content. Looking at the wind shear forecast from the European model, let's go ahead and zoom in on this very quickly. And looking at the wind shear right here, that's the 5-day anomaly, Patrick. Looking at this right here, basically what you're noticing is the wind shear in the next 24 hours across much of the eastern Gulf is gone. It's completely collapsed. Yes, there is some wind shear to the western half of the Gulf right here, but that's as of right now, that's going to weaken. And yes, there is some more wind shear that's going to hit here on the 16th, but I'm questioning whether that's actual shear or if that's the system. right there. I'm questioning where the source of that increase does come from. But by July 17th, you do notice there is some more wind shear kind of going into this into the Gulf region right here. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. But as of right now, if the system relocates further to the south, it's going to be in a considerably better environment, and not just off the coast of Florida, but also in the Gulf as well. And you're going to want to pay attention to that moving forward. So that's kind of what we're looking at with the wind shear in terms of the dry air. Looking at that right here, there is some dry air right here. I will warn you ahead of time that there is some dry air in here, but that can, because there's not as much, we're only down to like 40% relative humidity, which isn't really that bad of dry air. That can easily be mixed out. Give it a pretty considerable outflow boundary that just pushes out, similar to what Hurricane Laura did back in 2020. That can easily be mixed out, because I remember this pretty discreetly, and I talk about this quite a bit. I've talked about this a little bit last hurricane season, because this was a similar situation Helene ended up going through. Hurricane Laura, what ultimately happened with that was it was already organized as a hurricane, as a strong tropical storm as it was entering the Gulf, but then it had a massive, massive outflow of just surge that just kind of took out all the dry air that was kind of making the environment unfavorable in the Gulf, and just completely just erased it and mixed it out completely. And it allowed for Laura to go from a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm to a 150-mile-per-hour Category 4 hurricane before it made landfall in Lake Charles. So we could see a similar situation to that, albeit at a smaller scale, maybe kind of encompassing one half of the Gulf region instead of the entire thing. But by and large, you do have moist air coming in here, part of the system. And even if it doesn't do that, it's still going to be in a pretty good moisture pocket, and there's not going to really be much dry air disturbing it as it approaches the coast of Louisiana or Texas or wherever it'll ultimately go. So that's what we're looking at with the conditions right there. Conditions are actually pretty favorable for the month of July for the system to go if it needs to go. So with that being said, what are the operational runs showing? Well, the operational runs, and we've been talking about this, they're having a hard time catching up. This system is organizing faster than the operational runs are indicating. And no matter what data you plug in, they're still behind at that current point at initialization. And they're having a hard time catching up. And I've said this before, it's going to take a couple of days to catch up for this right here. But we can kind of show you a general gist of what the European is doing. European is showing a disorganized mess moving through the Gulf at this current point. Around July 17th, 18th is when the system allegedly makes landfall. It doesn't really show up on the European right there, but it's definitely there. It's definitely there. That is a fact for you, ladies and gentlemen. Taking a quick look at the GFS. The GFS is not really that much better with it. It does have something trying to develop, but it's just kind of disorganized, and it's still behind of what's going on off the coast of Florida. The Canadian does have a better track of it at this current point, but the problem is that even still, it's behind. The only run that's kind of catching up with it to some extent is actually the Icon. But the CMC does have something trying to develop and organize before it makes landfall in Louisiana, but ultimately it doesn't really have that much of a strong scenario, maybe like a weak tropical storm at most, according to the Canadian. But once again, all these models are kind of falling behind. They need to catch up. Lastly, the Icon, which is by far the most aggressive, has the system developing closed isobars before it moves into Florida right here, and then it moves into the Gulf right here, starts to organize and develops already a strong tropical storm off the coast of Louisiana. Then it reaches hurricane strength and potentially makes landfall moving forward in parts of southeastern Louisiana as a mid-range Category 1 hurricane. I will admit I was pretty skeptical of the Icon, but at this current point, but given the fact that the system is likely going to relocate further to the south and deeper into the Gulf region and deeper into some better conditions at this current point, based on what Alex Baller, Adler's talking about, same with Andy Hazelton, Eric Webb, based on those based on those scenarios right there, I think the Icon is something to pay attention to more so than the other runs, because it's having a better job of initializing it. But that is something we're going to have to keep watching, and that is something we will continue to update you on here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. We're going to be streaming tonight starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, discussing the threats and the hazards that the system will bring. So be sure you stay tuned for that. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. Please be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.